What if the beings we have called gods for millennia were not divine at all, but visitors from another world? What if the stories of creation, of great floods and god-kings, were not mere mythology, but a fragmented, misunderstood record of first contact? Tonight on Slumber Expeditions, we dive deep into the heart of one of history's most captivating enigmas, the Anunnaki. We will journey back to the dust-choked plains of ancient Mesopotamia, to the very cradle of civilization, where the Sumerians left behind a legacy of clay tablets detailing these powerful, enigmatic beings. Our comprehensive journey will explore the original cuneiform texts, the dramatic theories of Sitchin, and the compelling scientific and archaeological evidence that both challenges and fuels this modern mystery. So before you settle in, if you're finding comfort in these ancient astronaut mysteries, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. But only if you genuinely like what we do here. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to connect with a global community of curious minds who share this fascination with history's greatest enigmas. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's speculative journey together. Let the bustling cities of the 3rd millennium BC fade into view, where scribes in sun-baked temples diligently pressed the first words of our story into wet, enduring clay. You are kneeling on a packed earth floor within a scriptorium of the city of Nippur in the year 1750 BCE. The air is thick and hot, carrying the sense of baking clay, drying reeds, and the faint, oily smoke from a single lamp. Before you, a senior scribe, his hands calloused and stained with river ink, carefully incises a sharpened stylus into a moist tablet. He is not writing a royal decree or a merchant's contract. He is committing to eternity the stories of the gods themselves. The cuneiform signs, an intricate dance of wedge-shaped impressions, speak of the Anunnaki, the great deities who decree the fates. He whispers their names as he works. Anu, the distant king of the heavens. Enlil, the powerful lord of the wind and earth. Enki, the cunning god of waters and wisdom. And Ninhursag, the mother goddess of the mountains. He tells of a time before man, when the Anunnaki toiled in the dust of the Mesopotamian plain, mining its riches and establishing their first cities. He writes of their weariness, their rebellion against their labor, and the brilliant, fateful solution proposed by Enki to create a primitive worker, a Lulu, to bear the yoke of the gods. As you watch the story take physical form in the clay, you feel the weight of its detail, the specificity of its divine politics and genealogies. This is not a simple folktale. It is a complex historical and theological record, the very bedrock of Sumerian identity, and it feels less like a creation myth and more like a chronicle of actual, earth-shattering events. The Sumerian civilization, emerging abruptly in the Fertile Crescent around 4500 BCE, remains one of archaeology's most profound puzzles. They invented the wheel, the sailboat, the first system of writing, advanced mathematics and astronomy, and the concept of the city-state. This sudden explosion of knowledge, this cultural Big Bang, seems to have occurred with no clear, gradual period of development. It is as if a switch was flipped and humanity was catapulted from a nomadic, hunter-gatherer existence into organized, sophisticated urban life. Their own explanations for this meteoric rise are encoded in their texts, which attribute all knowledge, all me, the divine decrees that govern everything from kingship to crafts, to the Anunnaki. These gods did not simply create humans, they taught them, guided them, and lived among them, ruling their cities directly as god-kings for tens of thousands of years before the Great Flood. The Sumerian king list, A cryptic document blending the historical and the mythical details these reigns, stretching back into a deep, almost unimaginable past, with rulers who lived for thousands of years, further blurring the line between legend and a lost history. The pantheon of the Anunnaki was not a monolithic, harmonious family, but a complex, often contentious, political structure reflecting the very human struggles of the city-states that worshipped them. At its apex sat Anu, a somewhat aloof figure who resided in the highest heaven, a symbol of ultimate authority, but rarely intervening directly in earthly affairs. True executive power rested with his two sons, Enlil and Enki, whose rivalry forms the central drama of many Sumerian epics. Enlil, lord of the air and the earth, was often portrayed as a stern, authoritative ruler, the enforcer of divine law and order. He commanded respect and fear, and it was he who decreed the destinies of mankind from his cult city of Nippur. His word could bring civilization or cataclysm, and his impatience with a noisy, burgeoning humanity was said to be the direct cause of the Great Flood. Enki, whose name means Lord of the Earth, but whose domain was the fresh waters of the Abzu, the subterranean ocean, presented a stark contrast to his brother. He was the god of intelligence, craft, mischief, and creation. Portrayed as clever and compassionate, Enki was the patron of magic, art, and science. He was the divine engineer who designed the world at its creation, who fashioned the rivers and filled them with fish, and most importantly, it was he who conceived of and executed the plan to create humanity. He was the friend to mankind, the bearer of forbidden knowledge, the one who would often subvert Enlil's harsh decrees to aid his creations. This fundamental tension between Enlil's authoritarian control and Enki's rebellious ingenuity is a recurring theme, a celestial drama played out with humanity as its prize and its pawn. Ninhursag, the great mother goddess, acted as a sometimes mediator, a life-giver who assisted Enki in the creation of the first humans. The dynamics of this family were as intricate and fraught with jealousy, ambition, and love as any human royal court, suggesting a psychology and a presence that felt immediate and tangible to the Sumerians. The primary textual sources for these narratives are scattered across thousands of clay tablets and fragments, excavated from the ruins of ancient libraries in cities like Nineveh, Uar, and Nippur. The most comprehensive and dramatic of these is the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, which describes a cosmic war between generations of gods, leading to the formation of the earth from the shattered body of the primordial goddess Tiamat. Then there is the Epic of Atrahasis, a much older Sumerian account that details the creation of humans to relieve the toiling Igigi gods, the subsequent overpopulation of humanity, and Enlil's successive attempts to curb their numbers, culminating in the flood. The Epic of Gilgamesh, perhaps the most famous of these texts, while focusing on a mortal king's quest for immortality, is steeped in the world of the Anunnaki, featuring direct interactions with figures like Utnapishtim, the Mesopotamian Noah, who is granted eternal life by the gods. Each of these texts, when read in sequence, does not feel like disconnected mythology, but like chapters in a continuous historical saga, a chronicle of a people who believed, utterly, that their origins and their destiny were shaped by physical, tangible beings of immense power and technology. The physical world of the Anunnaki, as described in the texts, is also remarkably specific. They resided in their own cities, like Eridu, the abode of Enki, which was said to be the first city ever built. They possessed the tablets of destiny, which conferred ultimate authority over the cosmic order. They traveled in fiery chariots and boats that sailed the heavens. Their primary purpose for being on Earth, according to a modern reinterpretation of the texts, was resource extraction. The Epic of Atrahasis opens with the lower-ranking Ijajai gods toiling miserably, digging the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and mining the earth's minerals. It is this labor strike that forces the higher echelon of the Anunnaki to devise a new solution. This narrative of divine beings mining gold under harsh conditions does not easily fit the model of omnipotent, spiritual deities. It sounds more like the log of a corporate or colonial expedition, a story of an advanced crew stranded on a hostile planet, forced to innovate to achieve their mission objectives, an interpretation that would lay dormant for millennia, waiting for a key to unlock its potential meaning. The atmosphere of ancient Mesopotamia was one where the divine was immanent, woven into the very fabric of daily life. A rumble of thunder was not a natural phenomenon, but the voice of Enlil. The annual flooding of the rivers was the work of Enki. The king was not merely a political leader. He was the intermediary between the city and its patron god, the steward of the god's earthly estate. Temples were not just places of worship. They were massive, ziggurat-topped administrative and economic centers, believed to be the literal dwelling places of the gods. This was a worldview that left no room for a separation between the sacred and the profane. The gods were here, they were real, and they demanded service. This pervasive sense of presence, of a direct and ongoing relationship with powerful, capricious beings, is crucial to understanding the emotional and psychological impact of the Anunnaki stories. They were not abstract articles of faith. They were the explanation for the world as it was, a world governed by the sometimes benevolent, often terrifying, will of the Anunnaki. The decipherment of Cuneiform in the mid-19th century was an intellectual earthquake that shattered the Western world's understanding of its own past. For centuries, the Bible had stood as the oldest known historical document, the sole authoritative voice from the dawn of civilization. The discoveries made in the mounds of Mesopotamia changed everything, revealing a world that was not only older than the biblical narratives, but also contained startlingly parallel stories of creation, a Garden of Eden, a great flood, and a righteous survivor. The men who painstakingly pieced together this lost language, like Henry Rawlinson, who scaled the cliffs of Behistun to copy its trilingual inscription, were not just linguists, they were time travelers, pulling back a curtain on a universe of thought that had been silent for over 2,000 years. What they found was a people, the Sumerians, whose sophisticated cosmology and literature predated and likely influenced the writers of the Old Testament, forcing a profound reevaluation of humanity's spiritual and historical roots. The library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, discovered in the 1850s, was a treasure trove of this lost knowledge. Within its fire-hardened clay tablets lay the Epic of Gilgamesh, a literary masterpiece that predated Homer by well over a millennium. The discovery of its flood narrative, with its hero Utnapishtim, who built a boat to save the seed of life from the wrath of the gods, sent shockwaves through theological and academic circles. Here was the story of Noah, but in an older, more detailed, and arguably more visceral form. It was not an isolated tale. It was part of a vast and interconnected mythological system centered on the Anunnaki. These texts presented the gods not as omnipotent, transcendental spirits, but as physical beings with human-like forms, emotions, and needs. They ate, they drank, they fell in love, they waged war, and they could be injured and killed. This anthropomorphism is so consistent and so detailed that it begs the question of its origin. Was it purely the product of human imagination, projecting its own nature onto the cosmos? Or could it be a cultural memory, a distorted recollection of encounters with a very real, very advanced, and very mortal species? The Enuma Elish provides a cosmogony of startling violence and specificity. It describes a time when only the primordial waters of Apsu, fresh water, and Tiamat, salt water, existed, mingling together. From their union, generations of gods were born. The noise and activity of these younger gods disturbed Apsu, who plotted their destruction. The god Ea, later known as Enki, learned of the plot and slew Apsu, establishing his dwelling upon the slain god's body. From this act, the great conflict with Tiamat was born. She created an army of monsters to avenge her consort. The younger gods, terrified, turned to the champion Marduk, who agreed to fight Tiamat on the condition that he be granted supreme kingship. After an epic battle, Marduk slew Tiamat, and from her massive body, he crafted the world. He split her body in two, using one half to form the sky and the other to form the earth. He set the stars in their courses, established the calendar, and from the blood of Tiamat's slain general, Kingu, he created humanity to serve the gods. This narrative is rich with allegorical potential, but from an ancient astronaut perspective, it reads like a poetic account of a celestial catastrophe, the formation of the solar system, and the terraforming of a planet. The Epic of Atrahasis offers a more intimate and technologically suggestive narrative. It begins with a clear problem of labor. The Anunnaki had assigned the toil of the world to the lesser Ijajai gods. After 40 long years of digging canals and mining the earth, the Ijajai grew weary and rebelled, surrounding the great dwelling of the high gods in a fiery protest. The council of the Anunnaki was thrown into panic. Enlil, the commander, wanted to punish the rebels, but the wise Enki proposed a solution. He suggested creating a new being, a Lulu, a primitive worker, to assume the burdensome toil of the gods. The mother goddess Ninhursag was enlisted, and together with Enki, they undertook a process of creation that sounds less like divine miracle and more like a sophisticated genetic experiment. They took clay from the Abzu, the watery abyss that was Enki's domain, and mixed it with the flesh and blood of a slain god, who provided the essential essence or consciousness. 14 birth goddesses assisted in the process, and after several iterations, the first human, a sterile being, was successfully created. This act of mixing and fashioning a new creature for a specific labor purpose is a central pillar of the ancient astronaut theory, interpreted as the genetic engineering of Homo sapiens by an advanced species. The Sumerian king list is perhaps the most baffling and controversial of all the texts. It is a historical document that lists the kings of Sumer and the lengths of their reigns, divided into two sections, before the flood and after the flood. The antediluvian kings are said to have ruled for fantastically long periods, tens of thousands of years each, descending from the heavens to rule in the 5 cities of Eridu, Bad Tibra, Larik, Sapar, and Shurapak. After the flood, which swept over the land, the kingship was lowered from heaven again, and the reigns gradually decreased from 1,000 or so years to more historically plausible lengths. Mainstream archaeology views these incredibly long reigns as a form of mythological inflation, a way of granting legitimacy and immense antiquity to the institution of kingship. However, proponents of alternative theories see it as a literal, if stylized, record. They interpret the lowering of kingship from heaven as the appointment of human governors by the Anunnaki, and the incredibly long lifespans of the early kings as evidence of the Anunnaki's own advanced longevity, or perhaps the longevity they initially bestowed upon their hybrid creations before it was later revoked. The descriptions of the gods and their attributes, when stripped of their theological interpretation, are filled with technological analogies. Enlil's word that could destroy cities sounds remarkably like a command code for a powerful weapon. The tablets of destiny that conferred ultimate authority could be seen as a central computer or database containing the operational codes for their technology or the planetary system. The fiery chariots and boats of heaven that traverse the skies are classic descriptors of advanced aircraft. Enki's domain, the Abzu, is often depicted as a watery, subterranean complex, which could be interpreted as an underground base or a biolab. The Shamir, a mythical object said to cut through any stone, used by both Mesopotamian gods and in later Hebrew legends, bears a striking resemblance to a high-powered laser or sonic cutting tool. These interpretations are, of course, speculative, but they demonstrate how the attributes and tools of the Anunnaki can be recontextualized through a technological lens, transforming magical artifacts into potential pieces of advanced hardware. The role of the ziggurat, the massive stepped pyramid that was the centerpiece of every Sumerian city, also takes on a new dimension within this framework. Traditionally understood as a temple, a bridge between heaven and earth, its design suggests a more functional purpose. Its core was not made of mud brick, but of carefully fired and bitumen-sealed bricks, making it resistant to water and incredibly durable, the kind of construction suited for a platform that needed to withstand immense weight or powerful forces. The summit, where the god's dwelling was located, was often plated with precious metals or shiny materials. Some theorists propose that the ziggurat was not merely a symbolic stairway to heaven, but a functional launch tower, a communication array, or an energy-generating structure for the boats of heaven. The precise astronomical alignments of many of these structures further support the idea that they were part of a sophisticated, science-based culture guided by beings with a profound understanding of celestial mechanics. The psychological impact of encountering a technologically advanced species cannot be overstated. For a primitive human population, the sight of aircraft, powerful energy weapons, and genetic engineering would be utterly incomprehensible. The only vocabulary available to describe such wonders would be that of magic and divinity. The glory or aura of a god could be the blinding light of an energy field or propulsion system. The ability to speak to someone from a distance, or to see events far away, would be the power of omniscience. The ability to heal grievous wounds quickly would be miraculous. The creators of such technology would, by default, be gods. Their leaders would be kings of the gods. Their scientific manuals would be tablets of destiny. Their ships would be chariots of fire. This process of deification through a technological disparity is a central tenet of the ancient astronaut theory, suggesting that the Anunnaki were not perceived as gods because of their spiritual nature, but because of their technological superiority, which was, for all intents and purposes, indistinguishable from magic to the early human mind. The modern incarnation of the Anunnaki mystery is inextricably linked to the work of Sitchin, an Azerbaijani-born American author whose 12-book series, The Earth Chronicles, proposed a radical and comprehensive reinterpretation of Sumerian mythology. Born in 1920, Sitchin was a linguist and a scholar of ancient Semitic and Near Eastern languages. He claimed to be one of the few scholars in the world who could read and interpret Sumerian cuneiform firsthand. In the 1970s, he began publishing his conclusions, which wove the disparate threads of Sumerian texts, biblical stories, and archaeological anomalies into a single, breathtaking narrative. Sitchin did not see the myths as allegory or primitive religion. He saw them as literal, journalistic accounts of events that occurred some 450,000 years ago. His synthesis, while rejected and often ridiculed by the mainstream academic community, captured the global imagination and laid the foundation for the entire ancient astronaut genre. The cornerstone of Sitchin's theory is his interpretation of the Sumerian creation story, which he argued has been fundamentally misunderstood. He proposed that the Sumerians possessed advanced astronomical knowledge, including a description of our solar system that featured a 12th celestial body, a large, rogue planet with a highly elliptical, 3,600-year orbit around the Sun. The Sumerians called this planet Nibiru, and Sitchin identified it with the Babylonian god Marduk. According to his reading of the Enuma Elish, this planet was involved in a cataclysmic collision with a pre-existing planet in our solar system, Tiamat. This cosmic catastrophe shattered Tiamat, creating the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter and hurling the other half of the planet into a new orbit, becoming the Earth. This, Sitchin argued, is the true meaning of Marduk splitting Tiamat in two to create the heavens and the earth. It was not a spiritual act, but an astronomical event. Sitchin's narrative continues with the inhabitants of Nibiru, the Anunnaki. He described them as a humanoid species, technologically advanced but facing a severe planetary crisis, the erosion of their atmosphere. Their scientists, led by one of their leaders, proposed a bold solution: to suspend gold particles in their upper atmosphere to act as a reflective shield, repairing their damaged environment. This need for vast quantities of gold prompted a spacefaring expedition to Earth, a planet they knew was rich in this precious metal. Approximately 450,000 years ago, a group of 50 Anunnaki, led by the scientist Enki, traveled from Nibiru and splashed down in the waters of the Persian Gulf, establishing their first base at Eridu. Their mission was simple: to mine gold. The initial mining operations, conducted in southern Africa, were led by Enki and his team. However, the work was difficult, and the Anunnaki miners, the Ijajai, grew restless. After millennia of toil, they rebelled, as described in the Atrahasis epic. Faced with a mutiny that threatened the vital gold supply, the Anunnaki leadership held a council. It was Enki who proposed a radical solution: to genetically engineer a primitive worker, a Lulu, to take over the backbreaking labor. Sitchin interpreted the creation story with meticulous, biological literalism. The clay mentioned in the text was the very substance of life, the base organic material of Earth. The blood of the slain god Kingu was the essential genetic component, the DNA of an Anunnaki. He proposed that Enki and Ninhursag took the existing hominid on Earth, Homo erectus, and spliced its DNA with that of the Anunnaki, creating a hybrid species, Homo sapiens, intelligent enough to follow complex instructions, but docile enough to serve as a labor force. This act of creation was not an instantaneous miracle, but a process of trial and error, as hinted at in the myths that speak of imperfect early creations. Sitchin pointed to ancient depictions of hybrid creatures, man-lions, man-scorpions, and bull-men, as possible evidence of these failed genetic experiments. Finally, the perfect model, Adamu, was created. The biblical Garden of Eden, in Sitchin's view, was not an earthly paradise but a controlled environment, a laboratory in Mesopotamia, the Eden. The tree of knowledge of good and evil was a metaphor for the genetic potential and sexual reproduction that the Anunnaki initially withheld from their creations, keeping them sterile and controllable, like worker ants. The serpent in the garden was Enki himself, the rebellious scientist who sought to enlighten his creations, to give them the ability to procreate and thus ensure the survival of the species he had worked so hard to create. The Great Flood, a central event in both Mesopotamian and biblical texts, marks a pivotal moment in Sitchin's chronology. He argued that the flood was a natural, predictable catastrophe caused by the gravitational pull of the approaching planet Nibiru during one of its perihelion passes. The Anunnaki leadership, aware of the impending cataclysm, decided to let humanity perish, seeing it as a convenient way to wipe the slate clean. However, the sympathetic Enki, again defying the council, chose to save his favorite creation. He secretly instructed his devoted follower, the Sumerian Ziusidra, known as Utnapishtim in the Gilgamesh epic and Noah in the Bible, to build a submersible vessel to survive the coming deluge. After the floodwaters receded, the Anunnaki returned to Earth to restart the mining operations, but they now began to grant kingship to selected human individuals, hybrids who would rule on their behalf, leading to the god kings with incredibly long reigns listed in the Sumerian king list. Sitchin's work extends far beyond this core narrative, weaving in interpretations of ancient world wonders, from the pyramids of Giza to the stone circles of Stonehenge, as part of a global network of Anunnaki infrastructure. He saw the Great Pyramid not as a pharaoh's tomb, but as a beacon, a guidance system, and a power plant for the Anunnaki spaceport, which he located on the Sinai Peninsula. He interpreted the wars and conflicts described in ancient texts as battles between rival Anunnaki factions, particularly the ongoing feud between the lineages of Enlil and Enki, with humanity often caught in the middle. His chronology provides a detailed timeline of Anunnaki activity on Earth, from their first landing to their gradual departure around 2000 BC, a departure that left a newly independent, but psychologically scarred, humanity to fend for itself and to transform the memory of its creators into the gods of legend. As we conclude this part of our journey into the origins of the Anunnaki mythos, we'd like to extend a special thank you for listening. If you're finding comfort in these explorations, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Slumber Expeditions. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to connect with our global community of curious minds. You can also share which part of the story has captivated you the most so far. It would be wonderful to start a conversation around it. Now, let the mystery of what we've uncovered so far settle in your mind as we prepare to continue our exploration. The transition from mythological interpretation to scientific inquiry is a delicate and often contentious process, one where the grand narrative of the Anunnaki meets the rigorous, unyielding standards of empirical evidence. This chapter delves into the scientific domains that are most frequently invoked in this debate: genetics, archaeology, and astronomy. Each field offers tantalizing clues and perplexing anomalies that proponents of the ancient astronaut theory point to as potential proof of an outside influence, while mainstream science offers alternative, if sometimes equally revolutionary, explanations. The human genome is a vast and intricate library, a record of our evolutionary journey written in the language of DNA. For the most part, this record tells a story of gradual change, of adaptation through natural selection over millions of years, linking us inextricably to the great apes and the broader tapestry of life on Earth. Yet within this library, there are mysteries. One of the most profound is the relatively sudden increase in human brain size and cognitive ability that occurred roughly 200,000 years ago, a leap that seems disproportionately large and rapid within the standard evolutionary model. This event, which led to the emergence of Homo sapiens, is sometimes called the Great Leap Forward, and its catalyst remains one of paleoanthropology's most debated topics. Proponents of the Anunnaki genetic intervention theory see this not as a slow, gradual process, but as a punctuated event, a deliberate upgrade. They argue that the genetic distance between Homo sapiens and our closest relatives, the chimpanzees, while small in percentage, is profound in its expression, particularly in the areas of the brain associated with complex language, abstract thought, and self-awareness. The structure of human chromosome 2 is often cited as a potential piece of genetic evidence for such an intervention. In the great apes, There are 24 pairs of chromosomes, while humans have 23. This discrepancy was resolved when scientists discovered that human chromosome 2 is the result of a fusion between two ancestral ape chromosomes. The evidence for this is clear. Chromosome 2 has vestigial, inactive telomeres in the middle, where two chromosome ends fused, and a second, non-functioning centromere. From a mainstream perspective, this is a fascinating and well-documented example of a random evolutionary mutation that became fixed in the human lineage. However, from an alternative viewpoint, this fusion event is seen as anything but random. It is proposed as the possible smoking gun of a deliberate genetic engineering project, a key modification made by the Anunnaki scientists to stabilize their new hybrid creation, Homo sapiens, and to differentiate it genetically from its more primitive hominid ancestors. This interpretation suggests that the fusion was not a chance occurrence, but a calculated act of bioengineering, designed to create a being that was biologically distinct and reproductively isolated. The field of archaeology is replete with megalithic wonders that defy simple explanation, structures built with a precision and scale that seem to challenge the technological capabilities of the ancient cultures credited with their construction. The monumental platform of Baalbek in Lebanon is one such place. Its foundation contains the famous trilithon, three colossal stones each weighing an estimated 800 to 1,000 tons, quarried from a site over a mile away and lifted over 20 feet to fit perfectly into the wall. The logistical challenge of moving and placing such blocks is immense even with modern machinery. How is this achieved in a time presumed to have only simple tools, ropes, and human labor? Mainstream archaeology suggests the use of massive ramps, rollers, and immense coordinated effort over decades. Yet, the sheer mass and precision of the fit leave room for wonder. Proponents of the ancient astronaut theory see Baalbek not as a temple to the Roman god Jupiter, but as a prehistoric landing platform or a massive foundation for an Anunnaki structure, repurposed by later civilizations. The scale of the stones, they argue, is not for human glorification but for a functional purpose requiring immense stability, perhaps to support the weight and force of a massive spacecraft. The Giza Plateau in Egypt presents an even more profound collection of enigmas. The Great Pyramid, built for the pharaoh Khufu around 2580 BCE, is a masterpiece of engineering whose construction details remain hotly debated. The precision of its orientation to the cardinal points, accurate to within a fraction of a degree, the mathematical sophistication encoded in its dimensions, including the relationship to the value of pi and the golden ratio, and the immense logistical feat of quarrying, transporting, and placing over 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons, all within a presumed 20-year period, is a staggering achievement. The mainstream theory of a straight ramp, while plausible, faces significant challenges regarding the ramp's volume, which would have rivaled the pyramid itself, and the lack of any archaeological evidence for such a structure. The internal structure, with its grand gallery, ascending and descending passages, and the so-called King's Chamber containing a massive, empty granite coffer, defies simple funerary explanation. No mummy or grave goods have ever been found inside. The ancient astronaut theory reinterprets the Great Pyramid not as a tomb, but as a powerful, multifunctional machine. It is proposed as an energy plant, harnessing geothermal and acoustic vibrations from the Earth, a water pump, an astronomical observatory, or a communication beacon, part of a global network established by the Anunnaki. The precision of its construction is seen not as the product of brute force and primitive mathematics, but as the application of a lost, advanced science. Puma Punku, part of the Tiwanaku complex in Bolivia, is a site that utterly confounds conventional understanding. It is a collection of shattered, yet incredibly precise, stone blocks made of andesite and granite, some of the hardest stones on Earth. These blocks are not rough-hewn. They are cut with machine-like precision, featuring razor-sharp edges, perfect right angles, and intricate, interlocking channels and geometric shapes that seem to require advanced tooling for their creation. The H-blocks, for instance, are so uniform they appear to have been mass-produced. The official dating places the site around 500 to 600 CE, a time when the local culture is not believed to have possessed the wheel, a written language, or metal tools hard enough to work such stone. How were these blocks quarried, transported from miles away, and cut with such flawless accuracy? The mainstream explanation of stone hammers, bronze tools, and patient abrasion seems inadequate to account for the microscopic precision observed on the stone surfaces. For ancient astronaut theorists, Puma Punku is a clear example of pre-Diluvian Anunnaki technology, a sophisticated facility that was shattered in a cataclysm, perhaps the same great flood recorded in Sumerian texts, leaving behind its indestructible, incomprehensible ruins for later humans to puzzle over. The astronomical knowledge of ancient cultures provides another layer of compelling evidence. The Sumerians possessed a sophisticated understanding of the cosmos, including the precession of the equinoxes, a slow, 25,800-year wobble in the Earth's axis that is remarkably difficult to detect without long-term, precise observations. They depicted our solar system as a system of 12 bodies, with the Sun in the center, which included the Moon, the 9 known planets, they counted Pluto, and the enigmatic Nibiru. The most famous representation of this is the cylinder CLVA 243, which Sitchin interpreted as showing the Sun surrounded by 11 planets. Mainstream scholars identify the central object not as the Sun, but as a star, with the surrounding dots representing its luminosity or other symbolic meanings. The debate over this single artifact encapsulates the entire conflict between the theories. Is it a literal map of the solar system given by the Anunnaki, or a symbolic representation of a deity's celestial authority? The sheer depth of Sumerian astronomical knowledge, combined with their own claims that this knowledge was given to them by the gods, continues to fuel the speculation that they were the beneficiaries of an advanced, extraterrestrial education. For any theory to hold weight, it must withstand the fire of criticism and the scrutiny of alternative viewpoints. The Anunnaki narrative, particularly as articulated by Zecharia Sitchin, has faced a torrent of opposition from the academic community, spanning the fields of Assyriology, linguistics, archaeology, and astronomy. Their counterarguments form a formidable bulwark of skepticism, challenging the very foundations upon which the ancient astronaut theory is built. The primary and most devastating criticism comes from linguists and scholars of ancient Mesopotamian languages. They assert that Sitchin's translations of Sumerian and Akkadian cuneiform are, in many key instances, fundamentally incorrect. They argue that he took words and phrases out of their grammatical and cultural context, imposing a modern, technological interpretation onto texts that were clearly religious and mythological in nature. For example, the Sumerian word amu, which Sitchin consistently translates as rocket ship, is universally accepted by mainstream Assyriologists as meaning name or renown. The word asatyu, which he interprets as a fire-spitting command module, actually means hand or to hold. These mistranslations, critics argue, form the very backbone of his technological reinterpretation, and when corrected, the entire edifice of his argument collapses back into the realm of myth and symbolism. The astronomical core of Sitchin's theory, the planet Nibiru, is similarly dismantled by experts. Astronomers point out that a planet with a 3,600-year elliptical orbit that passes through the inner solar system would have profound and easily observable gravitational effects on the other planets, effects which are not present. Its orbit would be highly unstable over geological timescales. The discovery of the Kuiper Belt and the reclassification of Pluto as a dwarf planet have further complicated his 12-body solar system model. The cylinder seal VA 243, the linchpin of his astronomical argument, is dismissed by scholars. They identify the central figure not as the sun, but as a star, a common symbol for a deity, and the dots surrounding it are not planets, but representing the deity's radiance or perhaps stars themselves. The Sumerian knowledge of precession, while impressive, can be explained by centuries of meticulous observation by priest astronomers, a cumulative effort rather than a sudden gift from the gods. The academic consensus is that Sitchin created a compelling science fiction narrative by misreading ancient poetry as technical manuals. The archaeological anomalies, while fascinating, also have plausible conventional explanations that are continually refined. The construction of the Great Pyramid, for instance, is the subject of ongoing and productive research. Theories involving an internal spiral ramp or the use of water-filled canals to transport stones on barges are gaining traction and provide elegant solutions to the logistical puzzles. The discovery of a 4,500-year-old papyrus logbook at the Red Sea port of Wadi al-Jarf, written by a foreman named Mir, details the transportation of limestone blocks from Tura to Giza using a system of canals, directly illuminating the sophisticated organizational capabilities of the ancient Egyptians. At Puma Punku, experimental archaeologists have demonstrated that the precise stonework could be achieved through patient, generations-long work using stone hammers, bronze tools, and abrasive sand, coupled with an incredible mastery of stoneworking techniques that we have simply forgotten. The concept of archaeological arrogance, the assumption that ancient people were incapable of great feats, is often cited as a flaw in the ancient astronaut argument. These counterarguments suggest that we underestimate the ingenuity, patience, and collective intelligence of our ancestors, attributing their achievements to aliens rather than to human genius. From a biological and genetic standpoint, the evidence for a sudden, external intervention is also heavily contested. The fusion of chromosome 2 is a well-understood evolutionary event that is not unique to humans. Similar fusions have occurred in the lineage of other species. It is a random mutation that, by chance, provided a reproductive or developmental advantage and became fixed in the population. The junk DNA that was once thought to be a potential signature of alien engineering is now known to be largely functional, involved in gene regulation and other complex processes, all of which fit neatly within the framework of evolution by natural selection. The human brain's expansion, while rapid in evolutionary terms, still occurred over hundreds of thousands of years and is correlated with a shift to a higher protein diet from hunting, the development of complex social structures, and the pressures of a changing climate. There is no need to invoke genetic tampering by advanced beings to explain a process that, while remarkable, is consistent with the mechanisms of evolution. The psychological argument against the ancient astronaut theory is perhaps the most profound. It suggests that the theory itself is a modern myth, a product of the 20th and 21st century scientific age. In a world where technology has advanced so rapidly that it seems like magic, we are now projecting our own reality onto the past. We cannot conceive of building the pyramids with simple tools, so we assume someone else, someone more advanced, must have done it. This is a form of technological transfer where we imbue ancient gods with the attributes of our own scientists and engineers. Furthermore, the theory can be seen as a new form of cultural imperialism, denying the intellectual and creative achievements of non-Western, ancient cultures. By attributing the pyramids, ziggurats, and megaliths to extraterrestrials, we are effectively robbing the Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Inca, and other great civilizations of their rightful legacy, reducing them from brilliant innovators to passive recipients of alien knowledge. It is a narrative that, however unintentionally, perpetuates an outdated colonial mindset. Finally, there is the philosophical problem of the God of the Gaps. Throughout history, humans have used divine intervention to explain phenomena they did not understand: thunder, disease, the movement of the stars. As scientific understanding has advanced, the domain of the gods has shrunk. The ancient astronaut theory, critics argue, is simply the latest iteration of this tendency. It inserts aliens into the current gaps in our archaeological and historical knowledge. But gaps in knowledge are not evidence for a theory. They are simply invitations for further research. The history of science shows that these gaps are almost always filled by natural, human-centered explanations. To invoke aliens is to halt scientific inquiry, to settle for a fantastical answer instead of pursuing the more complex, but ultimately more rewarding, truth of human achievement and the slow, patient accumulation of knowledge and skill across the millennia. The story of the Anunnaki, while rooted in Mesopotamia, does not exist in a vacuum. If such a profound interaction between an advanced species and early humanity occurred, one would expect to find echoes of this event, fragments of the same core narrative, scattered across the world's oldest cultures, separated by vast oceans and impassable mountain ranges. And indeed, when one looks beyond the Fertile Crescent, a pattern begins to emerge, a constellation of myths that share startling similarities in their details of creation, gods, and cataclysm. These global parallels form a compelling, if circumstantial, argument for a shared, primordial experience. In the Americas, the myths of the Maya and the Aztecs speak of creator gods who fashioned humanity through several iterations. The Popol Vuh, the sacred text of the Maya, describes a series of attempts by the gods to create beings who would worship them. They first made animals, but they could not speak. Then they made men of mud, but they were weak and dissolved. Next, they fashioned men from wood, but they were soulless and unintelligent. Finally, using white and yellow corn, a substance of the earth, and the blood of the gods, they created the first true humans. The parallels to the Sumerian narrative are striking: multiple attempts at creation, the use of earthly material, and the inclusion of a divine essence or blood to grant consciousness. In South America, the Inca creation myth tells of Viracocha, the great creator god who emerged from Lake Titicaca after a period of darkness. He first created a race of giants, but they were disobedient and he turned them to stone. The ruins of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku are sometimes linked to this myth. He then destroyed this first world in a great flood. After the waters receded, he traveled across the land, fashioning new humans from stone and bringing them to life, teaching them the arts of civilization, language, and agriculture before departing across the Pacific Ocean, walking on the water. Viracocha, like Enki, is a teacher god, a bringer of knowledge who works with the very substance of the earth to create intelligent life. His departure across the water mirrors the departure of the Anunnaki, leaving behind a legacy of knowledge and a people to carry on. The presence of a flood myth and a creation involving stone is another resonant chord in this global symphony. Across the Atlantic, in West Africa, the Dogon people of Mali present one of the most astonishing and controversial anthropological cases. In the 1930s, French anthropologists Marcel Griaule and Germain Dieterlen recorded the Dogon's complex cosmological system. The Dogon claimed their knowledge was given to them by amphibious beings called the Namo, who came from the stars. Most remarkably, the Dogon described the star Sirius as a triple star system long before Western astronomy confirmed the existence of its dense, invisible companion, Sirius B, a white dwarf star. They knew its 50-year elliptical orbit and understood that it was incredibly small and heavy, the smallest thing made of the heaviest matter. How could a remote tribe, with no access to telescopes, possess such accurate knowledge of a star system that requires advanced technology to observe? Mainstream explanations suggest cultural contamination from visiting Europeans, though this is hotly debated. For ancient astronaut theorists, the Dogon tradition is a pristine preservation of knowledge imparted by the Anunnaki or a similar starfaring race, the Namo being a local interpretation of the teacher gods. In the ancient Sanskrit texts of India, the Vedas and the Mahabharata, we find descriptions that seem to leap from the page with technological fervor. The gods, the Devas and Asuras, are not peaceful spirits. They wage war using fantastical weapons. The Vimana are detailed not as mythical chariots, but as sophisticated flying machines, described in texts like the Vaimanika Shastra with intricate details about their construction, power sources, and capabilities, including their ability to become invisible and travel between planets. The weapons described are even more startling. The Brahmastra is said to be a projectile charged with the power of the universe, capable of destroying entire countries and rendering the land barren for generations, its effects chillingly reminiscent of a nuclear weapon. The ruins of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa in the Indus Valley have long puzzled archaeologists. The streets are scattered with black stones, which appear to be fused clay potsherds, and some skeletal remains show signs of sudden, intense heat. While mainstream science attributes this to a common vitrification process from cooking fires or kills, a minority of researchers have speculated, controversially, about the possibility of an ancient, atomic-level event. These stories, when viewed through a technological lens, suggest a past where the gods did not fight with lightning bolts, but with a technology indistinguishable from our own most advanced weapons. The Aboriginal cultures of Australia, with the oldest continuous culture on Earth, also hold creation stories that resonate with this theme. The concept of the dream time is not just a time of creation, but a time when the world was soft and malleable, and the ancestral beings, the sky heroes, traveled across the land, shaping its features and creating the first people. These beings, like the Wandjina, are often depicted with striking, non-human features: large, black eyes, no mouth, and halos or helmets around their heads. In local rock art, the Wandjina figures are powerful and otherworldly. The Aboriginal oral traditions maintain that these are not symbolic representations, but accurate portraits of the beings who came from the sky and brought the law. The consistency of these depictions across a vast continent and their persistence for tens of thousands of years offers a powerful, visual echo of the possibility that the gods of old had a specific, and perhaps universal, appearance. These global echoes, from the cornmen of the Maya to the star knowledge of the Dogon and the Vimanas of India, form a pattern that is difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. While each culture clothed the core narrative in its own unique cultural and environmental context, the underlying structure remains remarkably consistent. Beings from the sky arrive on Earth. They create or modify humanity. They impart knowledge and laws. They wage wars amongst themselves with powerful weapons, and they eventually depart, promising to return. This recurring motif suggests a deep, shared memory, a primordial event so profound that it was seared into the collective consciousness of early humanity, to be retold and reshaped for thousands of years, until the gods of flesh and blood became the gods of spirit and myth. It is a whisper from our collective past, a whisper that speaks of a time when heaven was not a distant realm, but a place from which our makers came. As we conclude this part of our journey into the analysis and global echoes of the Anunnaki, we'd like to extend a special thank you for listening. If you're finding comfort in these explorations, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Slumber Expeditions. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to connect with our global community of curious minds. You can also share which part of the story has captivated you the most so far. It would be wonderful to start a conversation around it. Now, let the mystery of what we've uncovered so far settle in your mind as we prepare to continue our exploration. The relationship between humanity and the concept of the Anunnaki, whether interpreted as gods or aliens, is not merely a historical or archaeological puzzle. It is a profound psychological drama etched into the deepest layers of the human psyche. This chapter explores the lasting imprint of this potential encounter, an imprint that has shaped our religions, our fears, our aspirations, and our very understanding of our place in the cosmos. The core of this imprint is the child-parent dynamic on a species-wide scale. If the Anunnaki were our genetic engineers, our creators, then humanity has lived its entire conscious existence in a state of profound orphanhood. The creators were present, they were tangible, they provided direction and punishment, knowledge and limitation. And then, according to the narrative, they departed. This departure, this absence of the parent, creates a deep, unconscious wound, a longing for return and reconciliation. This could explain the ubiquitous human drive for religion, the desperate search for a father or mother figure in the heavens, the need to feel watched over, guided, and loved by a higher power. The stern, judgmental god of Enlil and the compassionate, rebellious god of Enki are archetypes that find their echoes in the gods of nearly every faith, representing the dual nature of the parent who both disciplines and nurtures. This orphanhood complex also fuels our fascination with the stars and the possibility of extraterrestrial life. The enduring belief in a return, whether it is the second coming of Christ, the Mahdi in Islam, the Kalki avatar in Hinduism, or the promise of Quetzalcoatl's return, could be a cultural manifestation of this deep-seated hope that our creators will come back for us. The modern UFO phenomenon, with its narratives of abductions and messages, can be seen as a contemporary, technological reenactment of this ancient longing. The aliens in these accounts often behave in the same contradictory manner as the Anunnaki. They are both benevolent healers and cold, manipulative experimenters, reflecting the ambiguous legacy of Enki and Enlil. We are a species looking skyward, not just out of curiosity, but out of a homesickness for a home we have never known, a familial connection to beings whose absence defines our spiritual loneliness. This search for meaning in the cosmos is, at its heart, a search for a lost family. The concept of a golden age, a lost paradise from which humanity fell, is another near-universal psychological archetype that finds a potent explanation in the Anunnaki narrative. In the Sumerian texts, there was a time when humans lived in direct service to the gods in their Garden Eden. They were provided for, they had a clear purpose, and they were in direct communion with their creators. The fall was the acquisition of knowledge, of independent procreation, which led to their expulsion and the necessity of toiling for their own survival. This story is so central to the human condition that it appears in the biblical Garden of Eden and in the myths of countless other cultures. It is the story of adolescence, of breaking away from parental control and facing the harsh realities of an independent existence. The psychological trauma of this transition, from a state of guided innocence to one of self-reliant struggle, could be the root of our perennial nostalgia for a perfect, lost past. We are not mourning a geographical place, but a state of being, a time when the responsibility for our existence lay in the hands of wiser, more powerful beings. The societal structures and hierarchies we have built for millennia also bear the potential mark of this ancient relationship. The Sumerian texts make it clear that humanity was created to serve the gods, to be a labor force. This establishes a primordial paradigm of servitude, a cosmic justification for a rigid class system where the many toil for the few. The king, or pharaoh, was not just a ruler. He was the direct intermediary to the gods, often claiming literal divine ancestry. This concept of the divine right of kings persisted for thousands of years, legitimizing authoritarian rule by linking it to a celestial mandate. The immense, back-breaking projects like the pyramids and ziggurats, which required the coordination of thousands of workers, can be seen as a continuation of this servant relationship, now directed toward a human ruler who stood in for the absent god. The psychological acceptance of this hierarchy, the deep-seated belief that some are born to rule and others to serve, may have its roots in the original creator-creation dynamic established with the Anunnaki. We have internalized the role of the worker, the Lulu, and built our civilizations upon this foundational memory of servitude. Conversely, the myth also contains the powerful archetype of the rebel, the bringer of forbidden knowledge, embodied by Enki. This is the Promethean figure who defies the established order to empower humanity. This archetype is the driving force behind scientific progress, artistic expression, and all forms of revolution against oppressive systems. It represents the part of the human spirit that strives for independence, that seeks to grasp the fire of the gods, knowledge and technology for itself. The tension between the servile impulse, instilled by Enlil's desire for control, and the rebellious, Promethean impulse, gifted by Enki's compassion, is the central conflict of human history. It is the struggle between conformity and individuality, between tradition and innovation, between faith and reason. Our entire cultural and intellectual history can be viewed as a slow, painful process of working through this primordial psychological conflict, a process of growing up as a species and claiming the knowledge that was once forbidden to us. Finally, the Anunnaki narrative addresses the profound human fear of and fascination with insignificance. The traditional religious view places humanity at the center of a divine plan, the special creation of an omnipotent God. The scientific view, through evolution, places us as a fleeting, accidental branch on the immense tree of life, on a tiny planet in a meaningless cosmos. Both of these are existentially challenging in their own ways. The ancient astronaut theory offers a third, deeply compelling alternative. It suggests we are not an accident, but a deliberate creation. We are special, but not uniquely so in the cosmos. We have a purpose, even if that purpose was originally to be a servant species. This provides a narrative that bridges the gap between the need for meaning and the evidence of science. It tells us that we are part of a larger cosmic story, that we have relatives among the stars, and that our history is far more dramatic and significant than we ever imagined. This is a powerful psychological balm for the anxieties of the modern age, offering a sense of belonging and purpose in a universe that otherwise appears cold and indifferent. It is a story for a species coming of age, grappling with its own origins and its potential destiny among the stars. The story of the Anunnaki did not remain entombed in clay tablets or confined to academic journals. In the latter half of the 20th century, it underwent a dramatic metamorphosis, escaping the realm of obscure scholarship and exploding into global popular culture. This transition transformed an ancient Mesopotamian myth into a modern mythos, a living, breathing narrative that continues to evolve and adapt, influencing everything from books and television to music and new religious movements. Zacharias Sitchin was, without doubt, the primary catalyst for this transformation. His Earth Chronicles series, beginning with the 12th planet in 1976, acted as a cultural seed crystal. He presented his theories not in dry, academic language, but in the gripping style of a detective story, connecting us across time and space with audacious confidence. At a time when the world was captivated by the Apollo missions and the possibility of life on other planets, Sitchin's work provided a historical framework for these new cosmic wonderings. He gave the UFO phenomenon a deep, ancient past, suggesting that the aliens people were seeing were not new visitors, but our old creators, the Anunnaki, perhaps returning to check on their long-term experiment. Sitchin's work found fertile ground in the burgeoning New Age movement of the 1970s and 80s. Here was a narrative that rejected traditional religious dogma while simultaneously offering a spiritual alternative that incorporated science and technology. The Anunnaki story provided a cosmology that felt more relevant to a technological age than ancient miracles. It replaced parting seas with genetic engineering and burning bushes with rocket ships. It appealed to a desire for a more complex, esoteric understanding of human history, one that had been suppressed by mainstream institutions. The narrative was picked up and expanded upon by a host of other authors, such as Erich von Däniken, whose Chariots of the Gods had already primed the public, and later by theorists like David Icke, who wove the Anunnaki into a vast conspiracy involving reptilian overlords controlling world governments. Each iteration added new layers, transforming the Anunnaki from specific figures in Sumerian myth into archetypal players in a grand, hidden history of the world. The power of this modern mythos was amplified exponentially by the rise of the internet. Online forums, websites, and later, social media platforms became the new ziggurats from which this knowledge was disseminated. They created global communities of truth seekers who could share information, debate interpretations, and collectively build upon the narrative without the gatekeeping of traditional academia or publishing. YouTube channels and podcasts dedicated to the subject brought the story to life with dramatic visuals and narration, reaching audiences of millions. The internet allowed for the instantaneous cross-pollination of ideas, where an archaeological discovery in Turkey could be linked to a Sumerian text and a modern UFO sighting in Arizona within hours, creating a self-reinforcing echo chamber that strengthened the believer's convictions. This digital ecosystem ensured that the Anunnaki mythos was no longer a static story, but a dynamic, participatory, and ever-evolving phenomenon. The entertainment industry quickly recognized the narrative power of this modern myth. While rarely mentioned by name, the archetypes of the ancient astronaut theory have become a staple of science fiction. The Stargate franchise is a prime example, featuring the Goa'uld, a race of parasitic aliens who posed as the gods of ancient Egypt and used humans as slaves. The Transformers films hinted at a hidden history where the alien robots influenced ancient civilizations. The Prometheus film by Ridley Scott is a near-perfect cinematic rendering of the core Anunnaki premise, a team of scientists following ancient star maps to meet the engineers, the tall, pale humanoid race that created humanity, only to find a chilling and ambiguous reception. These blockbuster productions sanitize and dramatize the theory, but they inject its core ideas, that our gods were aliens, that we were created for a purpose, and that our origins lie in the stars, directly into the mainstream cultural bloodstream. This widespread dissemination has, in some cases, crystallized into fully fledged new religious movements and spiritual systems. Various UFO-based religions, such as the Raelian movement, explicitly teach that humanity was created in a laboratory by an advanced extraterrestrial species. While not always using the name Anunnaki, the foundational story is identical. These groups often incorporate elements of the narrative into their rituals, beliefs, and even their expectations for the future, awaiting the return of the creators. On a more individual level, the Anunnaki mythos has provided a framework for a personal spirituality that is both scientific and mystical. It allows individuals to see themselves as children of the stars, their very DNA containing the legacy of a cosmic heritage. This can be an empowering belief, fostering a sense of connection to the universe and a responsibility to evolve beyond our primitive, violent tendencies to finally become worthy of our celestial ancestry. However, the modern mythos of the Anunnaki is not without its shadow side. Its popularity has made it a lucrative commercial enterprise. A vast market has emerged for books, documentaries, conference tickets, and merchandise, all capitalizing on the public's fascination. This commercial engine has an incentive to promote the most sensational and speculative interpretations, often at the expense of factual accuracy or nuanced debate. Furthermore, the narrative can be co-opted by conspiracy cultures, weaving the Anunnaki into dark tales of global enslavement, hidden agendas, and impending apocalypse. This can foster a mindset of paranoia and disempowerment, suggesting that humanity is merely a pawn in a game controlled by ancient, invisible forces. The modern mythos of the Anunnaki, therefore, exists as a complex cultural force. It is a source of wonder and spiritual seeking for some, a compelling science fiction narrative for others, and for critics, a dangerous pseudoscience that promotes mistrust of established institutions and historical understanding. It is a story that holds up a mirror to our modern anxieties and aspirations, proving that the ancient gods, in whatever form we choose to interpret them, are still very much with us. As our long and winding expedition through the plains of Sumer, the corridors of scientific debate, and the landscapes of the human psyche draws to a close, we find ourselves not at a definitive destination, but at a quiet, contemplative vista. The mystery of the Anunnaki remains, in its essence, an unanswered question. There is no final piece of evidence, no smoking gun that can conclusively prove or disprove the extraordinary proposition that our species was visited, shaped, and created by beings from another world. The clay tablets sit in their museum cases, silent and enigmatic. The megaliths stand against the sky, their secrets still guarded. The human genome continues to reveal its complex history, a story still being read. We are left with a choice, a philosophical fork in the road where we must decide what this story means to us, not as a historical certainty, but as a narrative that speaks to something deep within the human spirit. Perhaps the true value of the Anunnaki mystery lies not in its literal truth, but in its power to re-enchant our perception of the past. For too long, our view of ancient history has been one of gradual, linear progress, a slow climb from primitivism to civilization. This story challenges that comfortable narrative. It introduces an element of the fantastic, the inexplicable, the wondrous. It asks us to look upon the Great Pyramid not as a tomb, but as a potential machine of unknown purpose. It asks us to read the Epic of Gilgamesh not as mere myth, but as a possible chronicle of a king's interaction with a being who possessed advanced technology. This re-enchantment does not require us to abandon reason, but rather to expand our sense of possibility. It encourages humility, reminding us that our current scientific understanding is a snapshot in time, and that the past may hold surprises that our present paradigms cannot yet accommodate. On the other hand, the story serves as a powerful testament to the breathtaking capabilities of our own ancestors, if we choose to see it as myth. The Sumerian civilization was a true miracle of human ingenuity. Their invention of writing, mathematics, and urban life was a cognitive revolution that set the course for all of human history. To attribute their achievements to extraterrestrials is, in a way, to do them a profound disservice. It robs them of their genius, their creativity, and their relentless drive to understand and shape their world. The Anunnaki, in this view, are the ultimate metaphor for the sudden, explosive power of human consciousness itself. They are the external projection of our own inner potential, the moment we awoke to our own power to create gods, build cities, and seek our destiny in the stars. The story, then, is not about them. It is about us. This leads us to the final, and perhaps most important, philosophical implication of the tale: the nature of divinity. The Anunnaki narrative forces a radical redefinition of what a god is. If beings of flesh and blood, with technology advanced enough to seem like magic, can be perceived as deities, then what does that say about the gods of all our faiths? It suggests that the line between the divine and the technological, the spiritual and the physical, may be far blurrier than we have ever imagined. It proposes a universe where advanced consciousness and technology could evolve to a point where they become indistinguishable from the powers we have traditionally ascribed to God. This is not necessarily a dismissal of the divine, but rather a relocation of it. It suggests that divinity might not be supernatural, but ultranatural, a part of the cosmos that operates on principles so advanced that we, in our current state, can only worship them as miracles. And so, we are left with a choice, a gentle invitation to sit with the mystery itself. There is no need for a frantic conclusion, for a final verdict to be reached tonight. The evidence for the Anunnaki as alien engineers is circumstantial, woven from tantalizing threads, but lacking a definitive weave. The evidence for them as profound psychological archetypes and cultural metaphors is equally compelling. Both interpretations have their own beauty, their own wisdom, and their own power to explain the strange and wonderful journey of humanity. Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in the liminal space between these two poles, in a reality that is more complex and more mysterious than either pure science or pure myth can encompass. As the final words of this documentary settle around you like a soft blanket, let the questions themselves be your comfort. Release the need for certainty. Let the image of the Sumerian scribe fade. Let the debates of scholars quieten. Let the towering ziggurats recede into the mist of time. The mystery has been here for thousands of years, and it will be here tomorrow. For now, allow this simple wonder of it all to lull you. Wonder at the vastness of the cosmos that might hold other intelligences. Wonder at the incredible ingenuity of the human mind that could conceive of such beings and build such monuments. Wonder at the enduring power of a story, told on clay under the light of ancient stars, that still has the power to captivate us, to haunt us, and to make us feel both incredibly small and profoundly significant in the great, unfolding story of existence. The expedition is over for tonight. The questions remain, echoing softly in the silence, a gentle lullaby for the curious mind. Let them carry you into dreams of starry skies and ancient worlds, where anything is still possible.